All right, let's jump right into today's explainer. Today, we're impartially deconstructing a pretty forceful, highly detailed analysis recently published by the Daily Signal. It features the conservative historian Victor Davis Hanson, and he is delivering a really comprehensive critique of California's governance. Now, whether you completely align with his perspective or fundamentally oppose it, unpacking his argument gives us a fascinating look into exactly how modern political critiques are built. We're going to visualize what Hanson is asserting here, pulling the data, the anecdotes, and the metaphors directly from the source material. To really wrap our heads around this extensive critique, we'll systematically break his argument down into 6 key parts: the ideological battleground, symptoms of the crisis, tracing root causes, the insulated elite, a conservative prescription, and finally, the medieval society analogy. Starting right off with part 1, the ideological battleground. So, interestingly enough, the source material actually kicks things off outside of California altogether. They share an anecdote from the Alliance Defending Freedom about Kathy McCord. She's an Indiana educator who actually won a $200,000 settlement after being fired over her objection to student pronoun directives she felt violated her religious beliefs. Opening with this specific story purposefully sets up the macro theme of our whole explainer here. We are looking at an intense, national ideological clash between progressive policies and conservative traditionalism. And, this perfectly illustrates what the analysis dubs the California experiment. Transitioning from those national cultural battles directly into the Golden State, the critique frames California not just as a state, but as this deliberate utopian project implemented by the political left. It's an experiment heavily characterized by diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, open border strategies, and increasingly lavish state budgets. Hanson presents it as the ultimate testing ground for this specific political ideology. All right, moving on to part 2, symptoms of the crisis. Their critique points to a pretty striking number right out of the gate: 400,000 to 500,000. That is the estimated number of Californians who fled the state between 2025 and 2026 alone. And Hanson emphasizes that they aren't escaping a barren wasteland, right? They are leaving what he describes as the most beautiful state in the country, a place that historically enjoyed strong bipartisan governance. In total, the source estimates a staggering 11 to 12 million people, which is roughly a quarter of the current population, have historically abandoned the state. So why are literally millions of people packing their bags? Well, the source unleashes a blitz of stats to illustrate what they see as a systemic decline. Despite having massive state budgets, a Reason Foundation study is cited ranking California's road quality 49th in the nation. School scores sit dismally at 40th or 41st, even though the state is 13th in educational spending. On top of that, it's highlighted that 22% of the population lives below the poverty line, and perhaps most visibly, the state harbors about 1/3 of the entire nation's homeless population. Now, here's a really fascinating paradox highlighted by the author. Hanson connects the state's green energy initiatives directly to its crippling cost of living. California boasts the highest gas taxes and prices. We're talking $7 to $8 a gallon, while simultaneously refusing to fully tap into its own oil and natural gas reserves, which actually happen to be the 5th largest in the U.S. Add in the shutdown of the timber and mining industries, the absolute highest electricity rates in the continental U.S., plus top-tier income and sales taxes, and the picture painted is of a state basically making itself unaffordable by design. So, what's driving all of this? Let's get into part 3, tracing the root causes. The source identifies a profound economic and geographic shift happening right now. Middle, and even upper-class taxpayers, along with small businesses, are reportedly getting squeezed out. They're making the tough choice to trade California's natural scenic paradise for what Hanson dubs the man-made paradises of states like Utah, Tennessee, and Nevada. Those states might not have the ocean views, but according to the critique, they offer infinitely more hospitable tax and regulatory climates. Then there's this massive demographic shift to consider as another root cause. Nearly 29% of California's population, so about 11 million people, are foreign-born. That's the highest proportion of any state. Hanson's argument asserts that an influx of this size required an enormous civic project of assimilation. But instead, the critique claims that a lack of civic education provided by state administrations ultimately led to fractured DEI tribalism and ethnic chauvinism, rather than a unified civic identity. Hey, we also have to follow the money, right? The analysis argues that a staggering $14 trillion in Silicon Valley market capitalization has fundamentally altered the state's political DNA.
This massive tech wealth has essentially funded a left-wing political monopoly. An enormous financial war chest provided by affluent tech elites has allegedly financed radical politicians, effectively shifting California away from its center-right history under governors like Reagan and Wilson and locking it into a one-party supermajority. Which brings us nicely to part 4, the insulated elite. So, according to the critique, all this immense wealth has created a class of insulated politicians who enforce policies that they themselves never actually have to suffer from. Current Governor Gavin Newsom is used as the prime case study here. Hanson labels him the iconic victim at the center of this storm. Tracing his career, the analysis really emphasizes that Newsom has not held a job outside the public sector since 1997. From the San Francisco Board of Supervisors up to mayor, then lieutenant governor, and finally governor. It's a portrait of a career politician who is entirely shielded from the private sector realities his policies impact. And what exactly happens when you have an insulated elite managing the state's wallet? Well, according to the source, explosive spending. When Newsom became governor, the budget sat at around $214 billion. In just 6 years, he has overseen a massive 64% increase, ballooning the state budget to $350 billion. And Hanson frames this not as vital investment, but as lavish, unchecked spending on a utopian project. Okay, let's pivot. What's the proposed solution to all this? That's part 5, a conservative prescription. The source material doesn't just sit back and offer criticism, it lays out a very clear 4-part conservative prescription to radically reverse the state's trajectory. First up, enforce a strict zero-tolerance policy for street encampments and public drug use. Second, close the borders and actively cooperate with federal ICE agents to bring down crime. Third, aggressively cut taxes and regulations, specifically by reversing bans on new oil and gas development to lower energy costs. And finally, radically change election protocols by auditing mail-in voting and requiring photo ID to address what the author views as a system ripe for fraud. And that leads us right into the climax of this whole critique. Part 6, the medieval society analogy. Hanson reaches a pretty stark conclusion here. He argues that California is no longer a modern republic. It has fundamentally regressed into a medieval society. Picture a pyramid in your head right now. At the very top, you have a small, highly wealthy coastal elite living in premium real estate from San Diego up to Santa Rosa, who continually vote for left-wing utopian projects because they are entirely exempt from the consequences. In the middle, you have a rapidly shrinking, hollowed-out middle class that's actively fleeing. And at the bottom, a massive, impoverished base drawn from around the world to a generous, if mismanaged, welfare state. As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look beyond just the borders of California. The source presents this entire situation as a cautionary tale of the highest order. If Hanson's structural breakdown is accurate, if the state truly is an intentional experiment resulting in an insulated elite ruling over a hollowed-out middle class, we have to ask ourselves, what does this model signal for the future of state governance across the entire country? Will this medieval pyramid remain a localized phenomenon, or is it literally the blueprint for America's future? Thanks for joining me to explore the anatomy of this argument. Keep analyzing, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.